All right, so we've created a brush, and one thing we also want to do is create a couple of variants from that brush, and I want to just discuss a couple of options here. We have this one brush that I have created here. I can click it to grab it. I can click a reset here to make it full original size. And certainly I should also store it, right? And in fact, we have cityscapes 1, 2, 3, but I also have my cityscapes here somewhere. And this is sort of a work in progress, the whip. And so I'm going to store it in here, simply to have a safe copy here. So save media, building, I don't know which building that will be. That will be building 10 perhaps, or 010. And so the thing that comes to mind is that it'd be nice if that same building could appear several times in perhaps an animator brush, right? I could use this as a starting point with the film strip here, showing that we have one image right now, and I want a variety of images of different sizes, different height. Though I want the building to appear tall or narrow or flat and wide, and a couple of different variants. Right, and that's really easily done while it's in the brush. Right, all I have to do is really make that brush a little bit taller in one direction, like vertically, so resample it basically. Right, so if I resample it, right now you see the indication here of how tall it is. In fact, let me move this up a little bit. I'm going to go move it up here so it'll be easier to see. If I go to the brush and resample it, you see a reference box here that indicates how big that brush is. And if you change this, it will proportionally change the entire building. So that's one way to give a bit of variety that you then can put into the animator brush here. Right, so simply add it there. So you get one building that's tall, another one that's a little bit shorter. And the other thing you want though is also change the aspect ratio. So it's perhaps keeping the width but going taller vertically, or vice versa, go in the make it stack it a little bit shorter but make it wider or something like that. So you want to change, you want to break away from that same aspect ratio, and so simply something like brush, resample, and then this time change, unlock this constraint so that you can change the height. Maybe instead of 1400 something, let's make it just 700, and then it becomes a bit shorter. Right, and then you could store that or add that. Then you can also change something like the hit X for actually you have to have the keyboard focused. Hit X to change the flip it, right? Flip it horizontally, right? Now that sometimes is not a good idea if the lighting is drastically different, right? If you have a very bright side where the sun is hitting it, because then you have something that looks odd if you paint with it, and you have most of the buildings appearing to be lit by the sun from one direction, but then a few of the buildings might be showing the sun coming from a different direction. So that's something you've got to be careful with. I'm not going to do the flip vertical or horizontal here in this case, but what I will do is again change perhaps a few more sizes, and say this time I want to make it very tall and also very narrow, sort of a really like a very narrow skyscraper, kind of like the one in New York called the Shtick. So I'm gonna I'm gonna go make this like a 240, and perhaps even increase the height a little bit more and say 1600. Right, so that's a really tall vertical building, right? And let's add that one too. And so you see, you now have a couple of these. And perhaps you still want a few more variants. Let's go back, perhaps make this one a little bit smaller, resample a little bit smaller, and keep the proportions now this time. So say perhaps 1300 and something like this. Right, so we now have also a smaller building here, and add that frame. So we now have an animator brush with 5 images in it, and we certainly should store that to be safe with it, but you can also simply paint with it right now. And what I'll do is I'll first make sure that my image is big enough to hold it, then zoom out a little bit. And so as I paint with this brush, I might want to change the size a little bit. There you go. So you can see now how it's alternating with these buildings. It's changing, it's painting from one to the other. The step is too close, so the step distance here may need to go a little bit farther apart. I may want to also add some other randomness, such as the hue. That's actually something you could do still here. Let me clear the film strip. I don't need to see that anymore. But I can reduce the amount of red to give it a bit more of a bluish tint. And then also change the random hue here. Add in the brush settings a bit of random hue. So it's, oh, and I need to allow that brush transform. So that's down here in the custom brush settings. So now we have a bit more variety. We have some saturation we can change. We can some randomly change the brightness. And so now you see these buildings are not all the same, right? They started all from one image, but they have been distorted, rescaled, resized, and also randomly some color changes are appearing. I may want to have some random size with that. So as I'm painting, they get even more resamples or resizes, changes, random position to lose control or predictability of where they're going to be placed as I'm painting. Maybe there's a little bit too much hue there, so let's reduce this a little bit. Well, I don't know what I'm doing here. That's, oh, I need to bring the red up a little bit there. Close to 90, 95, something like that. Okay. And so there's that, and so now you can quite easily create some sort of a hillside full of these. And if you use a tablet, you can also press a little bit harder to make them big, press a little bit less to make them thin and small. There's a few other things you could do, and perhaps add a little bit of a drop shadow that sometimes might add some extra fancy depth or halo depth if you want. The other thing that you might also want occasionally is apply filters like these filters, but you know it's in the brush, so you go to the brush menu and look on the Animator brush where there is a timeline editor there too. And so with the Animator brush timeline editor, you can see each of the frames that you have. There's a total of 5 in there. Remember, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are the frames we have in my film strip here, right? And if I want to apply some changes, let's say have them all change, add some color, but not all by the same amount, right? I may want to have a keyframe sequence here, so a little bit less red for this one. Let's keyframe that, and then towards the end of the frame sequence, add a little bit more red. And so we actually have a change in how much of that filter is applied for each of the parameters. So there you go. We have 5 of these. And then I can keep the render and keep going and change some more options there. So you see some of them have a reddish tint, some of them have a bluish tint. Let's say I want to add some sharpness or blur or contrast. There's a whole bunch of filters here that are going straight to the Animator brush. You might, for instance, have a negative too, and perhaps use that for a night view, right, where the buildings are kind of a grayish, but then some dark or some light. Where the dark windows are, it's going to be light. Let's see what that looks like. So now we have, there you go, that's the negative. Maybe not, so let's go render it again so it's back to normal. Let's see what else we could possibly do. Something like blur or sharpen, contrast, convolution, color emboss. Maybe not too much of it, but you can see here that it's a nice extra depth if you add some color embossing there, and then keep that, and to keep adding. Let's see what else we have here. I bet some photographic filters might be useful here. Oh, I don't have too many of those here, do I? Okay. Convolution, noise, transform, video, artistic. There's some wet paint. That occasionally can be quite useful too. I'm not sure what that's going to do in this case, but let's just apply it and we'll see. Okay, so I'm going to keep the render, and actually I'm going to, more importantly, use that destination as the brush. So now my brush has that wet paint look. You can see it's sort of a vertical streaks on the dark part, on the bright parts. Sometimes that's adding a nice sort of a strange look to these buildings. And I guess I just wanted to show you some of the many capabilities here with the custom brush system. I'm going to store this brush now and perhaps remove some of that coloring. It's a little bit too much saturation. So we have hue saturation value. This one here, saturation, I'm going to reduce that so it goes back to a bit more of a grayish. Still has some of that hue, but definitely less. Let's do a little bit that. Okay, so I think that sums it up for how to work with these brushes and build a whole sequence of buildings from really just one single image, and they're different size, different height. You can see still working with the step to make it even more sparse, and then also change the size to make him a little bit smaller. And you can really easily create a whole landscape full of city blocks that way. And to think of it, this was just one image. Okay, all right. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.